Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the wildest, most contradictory periods in modern history, the half-century that followed World War II. Think about it. You have this incredible, terrifying global tension, and at the exact same time, this unimaginable wave of prosperity. It's a real paradox, right? So let's set the scene. It's 1945. The most destructive war humanity has ever seen has just ended after 6 long years. And the world is just shattered, exhausted. We're talking cities literally turned to rubble, economies completely destroyed, and tens of millions of people gone forever. The world that existed before the war, it was ancient history. So what on earth do you do next? How do you even begin to rebuild from that level of devastation? Well, from those ashes, two completely different futures started to grow, side by side. On one hand, you get a terrifying global stare-down between two new superpowers, pushing the world right to the edge of nuclear war. And on the other, an unbelievable economic boom, a golden age of prosperity for millions. It's pretty wild. All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to see how the end of one war planted the seeds for the next. Then we'll watch as an iron curtain slams down across Europe. After that, we'll get into the surprising golden age of capitalism, the constant threat of living on the brink of disaster, and finally, how the entire Soviet system just unraveled. Okay, first things first. To really get what's happening after World War II, you've got to rewind a little and look at what caused it in the first place. It's so true that the way one conflict ends almost always defines how the next one begins. The unresolved issues from World War I were basically a ticking time bomb. The Treaty of Versailles slapped Germany with these incredibly harsh, humiliating terms. This fed a powerful and dangerous myth that the country had been betrayed, not defeated. All that resentment created the perfect political storm for leaders like Hitler to rise to power, leading to these aggressive, expansionist governments in Germany, Italy, and Japan that all eventually teamed up. So, fast forward, the Axis powers are defeated. But that wartime alliance between the winners, mainly the United States and the Soviet Union, was always pretty shaky. I mean, they shared a common enemy, sure. But once that enemy was gone, well, it turned out their visions for the future were completely, fundamentally incompatible. And that alliance just shattered. And Winston Churchill, man, he just absolutely nailed the feeling of the moment with this famous line, an iron curtain. It wasn't a physical wall just yet, but it might as well have been. It was this stark, uncrossable line, political, military, and ideological, that just sliced the continent of Europe clean in two. And this is why we call it the Cold War. It wasn't hot in the sense that you had American and Soviet armies directly shooting at each other on some massive battlefield. Nope, this was a totally different kind of struggle. It was a global chess match for influence, fought with spies, propaganda, a terrifying arms race, and, as we'll see, some very real, very bloody wars fought by other people in other places. And here are your two teams, the two opposing sides. On one side, you've got the Western Bloc, led by the U.S. championing capitalism and democracy, all organized under the NATO military alliance. On the other, the Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviet Union, pushing communism and forming the Warsaw Pact as their countermove. These two blocs, these two massive alliances, would define just about everything in world politics for the next 45 years. Okay, so this is where the story takes a really surprising turn. Because while the whole world is bracing for World War III, a huge chunk of it starts getting richer. Like, incredibly rich, faster than at any other time in human history. A huge catalyst for this was something called the Marshall Plan. The United States pumped over $13 billion, and you gotta realize that's almost $200 billion in today's money, into rebuilding and modernizing Western Europe. It was this massive investment designed to create stable countries and strong trading partners who wouldn't be tempted by communism. And you know what? It worked. This era is called the Golden Age of Capitalism for a reason. For about 25 years, economies boomed, jobs were everywhere, and big financial crises were incredibly rare. And the craziest part is that this growth was most explosive in the very countries that had been absolutely flattened by the war. I mean, just take a look at these numbers. The US economy is growing at a really healthy pace, but then you look over at West Germany and Japan, and it's just mind-blowing. People called them economic miracles, and that's really what they felt like. They grew so fast that their entire societies were transformed, turning them back into industrial powerhouses. But, and this is a really big but, this whole golden age of prosperity was lived out under a very dark shadow, the constant, terrifying threat that the Cold War could turn hot at any moment and lead to nuclear Armageddon. So, to avoid a direct world-ending war, the superpowers got creative. They fought through others in what we call proxy wars. They would arm, fund, and advise opposing sides in regional conflicts all over the globe, basically turning local fights into international battlegrounds for their big ideological struggle. And these conflicts became the deadly theaters of the Cold War. You have the incredibly tense Berlin blockade right at the beginning, and then these brutal, drawn-out wars in Korea, Vietnam, and later on Afghanistan. These were the places where the Cold War got very, very hot, costing millions of lives and destabilizing entire regions for decades. The rivalry wasn't just on Earth, either. Oh no, it extended all the way to space. The space race was the ultimate high-tech, high-stakes competition for bragging rights. The Soviets scored some huge early victories with Sputnik and putting the first man in space, but the US ultimately claims the grand prize by landing astronauts on the moon, a hugely powerful symbol of technological and ideological victory. And underneath all of this competition was the most dangerous game of all, the nuclear arms race. At its absolute peak, the combined nuclear arsenals of the US and the USSR topped 60,000 weapons. It's a terrifying number. That's a stockpile with enough power to destroy all of human civilization many, many times over. So, after all that, how did it end? Ultimately, the Cold War wasn't won on a battlefield. It ended because one of the main players just collapsed from within. It just couldn't sustain the struggle anymore. And here's the core of the problem. The Soviet Union was essentially a military superpower built on top of a second-rate economy. They were funneling up to a full 25% of their entire economic output into the military just to keep pace with the West. That created this unsustainable strain that led to decades of stagnation and shortages for its own people. And the end came with stunning speed. The new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, he tried to reform the system with glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, restructuring. But what he actually did was open the floodgates. Openness just showed everyone how broken the system really was, and that sparked popular movements all across Eastern Europe. It all led to that iconic moment when the Berlin Wall fell. And just 2 years after that, the Soviet Union itself officially ceased to exist. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The world we live in today was forged in the fires of this conflict. So many of the tensions and alliances from that time still echo today. It makes you wonder, did the Cold War ever truly end? If you enjoyed this journey through history, do us a huge favor. Give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more incredible stories from the past. And hey, drop a comment below and let us know what moment in history you'd like us to explore next.